All right. Hello, everyone. Uh, Welcome to the first afternoon session. Uh, my name is David Montgomery. I'm the host of the Siecla podcast, but you're not here to see me. You're here to see Nick and then other great guests in this room later this evening, or later this afternoon. So I will just get on with the introductions. Uh, as a reminder, I'll be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. We'll moderate the questions at the end. So if you have, feel free to make comments as you go or drop them in at the end of the talk. This isn't anyone's first rodeo. So uh, Nick Paczynski is the host or former host of History of the Inca. Uh, he participated in digs in the American Southwest, Rome, and Peru. His interest in the Inca took off as an undergraduate at the University of Michigan. Despite going back to school and switching careers, he retained his strong interest in the Inca. When not podcasting or working, Nick enjoys spending time with his wife, playing with his three boys, and most important of all, his favorite dumpling is the pierogi. Nick, take it away.
Thanks, David. I'll go ahead and share my slides now, everyone. Where did they go? No, of course, they don't come up right away. One second, everyone. Apologies.
While Nick is looking for that, I will vamp some time a little bit by, of course, encouraging you to check out all the other talks. And okay, we're ready to go. Great. Uh, Nick, take it away.
Thanks, David. Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. New to presenting in this format, new to the conference, sort of, as far as a presenter. Welcome, everyone, to my talk on the lies of Cajamarca. Deception between the Inca and Conquistadors. Thank you very much to Intelligent Speech for having me. I've been a fan of the conference for years. I've attended as many as I have been able to, and I watched the recordings. This year, gathered the courage and actually had the time to pull together a presentation for you all. So thank you for all attending this topic, the lies of Cajamarca. Now then, for a bit of background and place setting for our topic, for those who might not be familiar with the Inca or the geography of Peru, our story takes place in 1532 as the conquistadors explore Central and South America. Years ago, Francisco Pizarro, a man with a minor amount of noble blood, had retired to an estate in Panama to raise cattle after fighting in the Italian Wars and traveling to the Americas to test his fortune as a conquistador. But his desire to return to the life of a conquistador struck when a cousin of his, a one Hernan Cortez, successfully toppled the Aztecs. Having heard of rumors of a people in the south who drank from gold vessels, Pizarro and his conquistadors landed in Tumbes, a town on the coast of modern day Peru, and made their way into the interior. They encountered several indigenous groups under the control of the Inca, but many of the towns they passed through were depopulated or abandoned completely due to disease and war. Of course, disease brought over by Europeans had a devastating impact on indigenous populations. One such disease, smallpox, is believed to have been the reason or may have been responsible for taking the life of the Sapa Inca Huayna Capac several years prior. With Huayna Capac gone, the Inca were in the midst of a civil war between the Inca's two sons, Huascar, who was in control of the capital Cusco and a majority of the empire, and then Atahualpa, seen here, whose power base rested in his father's experienced army, which was around the north near modern day Quito. During the course of the Civil War, Atahualpa's generals rolled over Huascar's forces repeatedly and were on the cusp of capturing Huascar himself, while Atahualpa moved to camp with his forces in the mountain town of Cajamarca, awaiting the news of certain victory. Of course, communication was different in the 16th century. No email, text, or phones. And in the Andes Mountains, at the time of our story, the only people who had horses were the conquistadors, and they only had a few dozen. Instead, messages were sent via a network of message runners called chasquis. These messengers would literally run a few kilometers, because we are talking hundreds, if not a couple thousand feet of elevation, and pass the message off to another runner, and so on. Believe it or not, this chasqui system was quite quick. It has been said that if the Sapa Inca desired fish in Cusco, it would be brought from the coast and ready for him the next night. It was this system in which Atahualpa and Pizarro would begin to communicate with one another over the coming weeks, and where we will begin our analysis. So the first envoys from Atahualpa came to greet Pizarro prior to the Conquistador and his men entering the Andes. They brought gifts of food, such as geese, llama, maize, honey, dried fruits, and pepper. The conquistadors were also gifted vases of gold and silver, as well as emeralds and bracelets. Finally, the envoys said that Atahualpa desired to be Pizarro's friend and wanted to receive them in peace at Cajamarca. For Pizarro's response, I will quote his secretary, Francisco de Jerez. The governor received the present and spoke to the messenger, saying that he rejoiced greatly at his arrival, being a messenger from Atahualpa, whom he desired to see by reason of the things that he had heard of him, that he knew that Atahualpa was making war upon his enemies. He had resolved to go to see him and be his friend and brother, aiding him in his conquest with the Christians who accompanied him. Pizarro then gave the messenger a shirt and a few other items to take to Atahualpa as a sign of goodwill. But is Pizarro actually interested in friendship with Atahualpa at this moment? Likely not. With the few forces he had with him and in an unfamiliar land, Pizarro had to act friendly towards Atahualpa and attempt to gain the Inca's trust. Beginning an exchange of messages with any sense of hostility would have been suicide on the part of the conquistadors. And they are well aware of this, given the conquistador experience in the Americas up to this point. In many cases, if not all, they were outnumbered compared to the indigenous group or groups they were dealing with. They needed to act friendly to at least live long enough to have a chance at toppling any group they encountered. The next exchange of messages came just after Pizarro and his contingent entered the Andes. While at a tambo, or a resting station, along the Capacnan, or Royal Road, the envoys arrived with 10 llamas for the conquistadors to consume. As the messengers rested, Pizarro was able to learn more details of the civil war Atahualpa was having with his brother Huascar. And from what we can tell, the messengers were pretty accurate in telling Pizarro what occurred. Juan Capac died, Atahualpa controlled the Quito area, Huascar the rest. Huascar wanted Atahualpa to come to Cusco to pledge fealty, but Atahualpa refused. When Huascar heard this, he killed the messengers Atahualpa had sent. Some of them were brothers to them both. And then Atahualpa began his march south. The only part that may be stretched or implied is that Atahualpa actually led those armies, when in reality, it was his generals who were the military masterminds. From what we can tell from our sources, Atahualpa was defeated as a young captain in his father's army, and then was captured on the onset of his march south against Huascar, but was able to escape and continue the war. Those details were likely left out of any story the messengers told Pizarro. But not wanting to be outdone, Pizarro felt like he must respond with his own exploits and goals. And I'm going to break this quote up a bit so we can look at the different parts that are not as truthful as the conquistador makes them out to be. The emperor has sent me to these lands to bring the inhabitants to a knowledge of God, And in his service, I have defeated greater lords than Atahualpa, and with these few Christians that are with me now. Now, the issue isn't necessarily with the first part of that sentence, but the latter. Though there is little doubt that there may have been a select few people who Pizarro had served with, either in Italy, such as his brothers, or in the Americas, there were no groups that Pizarro had encountered in the Americas at that point as powerful as the Inca. There just weren't. We were talking about an empire that stretched from southern Colombia to the Mole River in modern Chile. It had a sophisticated road and supply system to support massive armies. Now, perhaps Pizarro was a bit ignorant of all this. Indeed, he didn't know how large the Inca Empire was at that time, and nor did he initially believe reports from local inhabitants who stated that the Inca could field an army tens, if not tens of thousands strong. So maybe we should cut him a little bit slack here. Continuing on with Pizarro's statements, if he should wish to be my friend and to receive me peacefully as other lords have done, I shall be his good friend, and I will assist him in his conquest, leaving him in his present state, for I go through these lands to discover the other sea. Yeah, that's a lie. As we know, the conquistadors would be the ones to spring a trap for Atahualpa. However, knowing However, there would be some truth to this statement of wanting to leave Atahualpa in his present state as head of the empire for a little while, anyways. But we'll get to some of that in a bit. Finally, from Pizarro, but if he should wish for war, I will make war, as I have done against the chief of the island of Santiago, and against the chief of Tumbes, and against all others who have wished to have war with me. I will make war upon no one, and nor I do molest anyone unless war is made upon me. This is a blatant lie. The conquistadors, including Pizarro, would consistently provoke attacks from indigenous people and commit many atrocities. Years ago, Pizarro received a commission as second in command on an expedition that had set out from the Darien with a one Gaspar de Morales. The latter committed deplorable acts. One such tale is that he fed local caciques or leaders to his dogs, and another that while needing to retreat, Morales ordered prisoners stabbed and left behind so the attackers could attend to the wounded instead of pursuing the retreating conquistadors. Being Morales' second in command, we can make the assumption that Pizarro had a hand in these acts. There are also numerous examples of Pizarro's men capturing and torturing indigenous people for information about the Inca, and more specifically about Atahualpa. In fact, several days after the first meeting with Atahualpa's messengers, Pizarro ordered a leader of a village tortured until the conquistador heard what he wanted to hear. Atahualpa was waiting with hostile intentions. In reality, the man had no idea what Atahualpa was planning. He just wanted the pain to end. But we've been focusing a lot on the conquistadors right now. What about the Inca? Were they more forthcoming in these exchanges leading up to the events at Cajamarca? Just days prior to Pizarro arriving in the highland town, we see an interesting exchange between two messengers in front of the conquistador. Messenger number one was part of the first envoy that greeted Pizarro on behalf of Atahualpa and repeated much of what the second envoys stated the day or so previously about the strength of the Inca. Messenger number two arrives the next day and is not a messenger from Atahualpa at all, but is from San Miguel, a small colony that Pizarro had established before marching further inland. The conquistador had sent this local cacique or leader as an informant to gather information on whether troops hid in ambush in the mountains and to learn what Atahualpa's true intentions were. Well, when Pizarro's informant sees Atahualpa's messenger, the informant attacks. When he is finally pulled off the messenger, the informant tells Pizarro that the messenger is there to spread lies. The informant wasn't allowed to see Atahualpa, but that the Sapa Inca was in quote unquote warlike array outside of Cajamarca with a large army, and the town itself was completely empty. Now, according to Atahualpa's messenger, this was all on purpose. The town was abandoned to allow the conquistadors to lodge there. Atahualpa could not see Pizarro's messengers because the Inca was fasting, part of the ritual to formally be declared Sapa Inca. The army? That was just what Atahualpa held back when his generals went ahead towards Cuzco with a bulk of the army. Were all these lies? That is more difficult to say. If anything, there were certainly convenient excuses that may have served a dual purpose. The Inca had just captured Huascar at this point, but it wasn't so simple to disband an army in the middle of the Andes, and it would have been difficult to lodge them all in the town of Cajamarca itself. Fasting was a requirement and part of the ceremony in becoming Inca or Sapa Inca. This we know. Though he likely wanted to be called Sapa Inca prior to this, the Atahualpa still needed to go through the proper ceremony to don the fringe or Inca crown, known as the Mascapacha. So the Inca may not be here, but they could see the above excuses as a cover against. Pizarro arrived in Cajamarca on the evening of the 14th, November 14th, 1532. And not long after arriving, another messenger arrived and informed Pizarro that he and his men could rest anywhere in the town except the fortress of the plaza. Now, this fortress wasn't really a fortress, but a lone tower, which are rare in Andean architecture. There weren't many towers built, and none really survive today. But the messenger was talking this lone tower overlooking the central plaza of Cajamarca. Here's a map, rough map in the colonial era of the town. Pizarro agreed he would not have anyone stay up there, but prior to the messenger's arrival, he had ordered his captain of artillery, Pedro de Candia, who was Greek, to take two small falconets up there. Now, these falconets are very light cannons, but they could still fire a 1-pound shot 5,000 feet. We shouldn't be surprised that Pizarro had artillery placed in the tower, being the soldier that he was. Pizarro knew the building offered a strategic advantage overlooking the plaza, and it was very important to secure that. But he, of course, didn't ask his men to leave the tower after hearing the Inca's request not to lodge there. A key detail when it came to the events of the next day. The morning of November 15th began with a flurry of messages from the Inca. The first one stated that Atahualpa wished to lodge himself and some of his men in the plaza, and that his soldiers would come armed. We can imagine Pizarro not being too thrilled about this idea, but he accepts nonetheless. The next Inca messenger returns to say that the Inca soldiers would not come armed at all. Yet, as the day drew on and the Inca approached the town from across the plain, a sentry claimed that under the tunics the Inca were armed with clubs and slings. So as the Inca entered Cajamarca, were the Inca armed or not? Unfortunately, it isn't very clear to us. Though there are sources that are certain that the Inca came armed, the Inca also did not dress for war. They arrived in a colorful array of garb hardly suited for battle. Squadrons came into the plaza dancing and singing, while what armor was worn was made of gold and silver. Certainly not for battle. If any arms were brought, they were ceremonial only. The messages from the Inca were very mixed that day. Saying that would be armed, then saying that they wouldn't. Was it all just a big mix-up, a lost in translation moment? In the aftermath of the charge of the conquistadors, there's no account stating that weapons were picked up from the dead. And apparently, there were no Spanish casualties and hardly a mention of an injury. One would think there might be something mentioned in the accounts if a few brave Inca soldiers attempted to stand their ground and fended off a conquistador with a legitimate weapon, but there's nothing. What we do know is that if the Inca did attempt to conceal weapons under their clothes, they didn't they didn't have a chance to use them. Then we have Pizarro hiding his men. After the first messenger left that day, the conquistador split his men into four groups, not including the artillery in the tower. The entire time they are waiting and watching the Inca file into the plaza. Pizarro is giving words of encouragement to his men and instructs those in his group that Atahualpa must be captured alive. Not really the thing one does when greeting a friend now, is it? Jumping out of a building on horseback to kidnap somebody? Of course, this is what happens when Pizarro gives the signal for the falconets to fire. The blasts scare the Inca and signal the conquistadors to rush out of the building and into the plaza of Cajamarca. Now, we aren't here to cover the gruesomeness of the battle, if it could even be called that. It was really a rout. What I wanted to do is get to the conversation between Pizarro and Atahualpa when the latter was captured. And the two were face to face, for it was here that their true intentions are actually revealed. In one of the buildings of Cajamarca, Pizarro told Atahualpa, "Do not take it as an insult that you have been defeated and taken prisoner. For with the Christians who have come with me, though so few in number, I have conquered greater kingdoms than yours, and have defeated more powerful lords than you, imposing upon them the dominion of the emperor whose vassal I am, and who is king of Spain and of the universal world." Atahualpa's response, through one of Pizarro's interpreters, reveals the Inca position, which has always been a little bit less clear. I was deceived by my captains, who told me to think lightly of the Spaniards. I desired to come peacefully, but they prevented me. But all those who thus advised me are now dead. And in another source, Atahualpa answered, half smiling, that he was not sad about that, but because he had expected to make the governor a prisoner, and that the reverse had come true. So I've dabbled in the board game of diplomacy a little bit, and maybe some of you have as well. If anyone is not familiar with that game, it's where you're playing as a nation set in 1900 Europe, and you must take each other's supply centers to win. But you move based on conversations you have with other players. Truths are told, but there's also a lot of half truths and lies. And at the end of the game, many matches that I've been a part of, there's this moment when, after the dust settles, we all shake hands. Everyone reveals their thinking and true intentions in their moves. And this moment between Pizarro and Atahualpa sort of feels like that. The game is over. They let their guard down and sort of reveal their true intentions to one another. Pizarro told many lies to the Inca, promising friendship and cooperation. To us, with not only the benefit of hindsight, but knowledge of the exploits of conquistadors prior to Pizarro, we know all along that Pizarro is lying to position himself and the Inca in the way that he wants. But the Inca didn't have the benefit of hindsight, nor did they know of the conquests of the Caribbean or Mesoamerica. Sure, the Inca were suspicious, but they didn't know and couldn't have imagined Pizarro was there for conquest. But he was. Pizarro matched what his cousin Cortez had accomplished. It upended an empire that was already rocked by war, riddled with disease, and it had cascading effects for South American history. The Inca lied to themselves in a way. The Inca armies always had superior numbers to their foes, but lacked discipline. The phrase, "cut the head off the snake and the body will die," was never more true than when describing Andean armies. And it was common for an army to melt away if the general was killed in battle, let alone the Sapa Inca. And it wasn't unheard of for the Inca to send vast amounts of men into a fortified area to try to overwhelm an enemy. They didn't have siege equipment. This was how they took fortresses. It would cost a great number of lives, but it would often work. In the case of Cajamarca, it all failed. Atahualpa was captured, and the soldiers caught off guard, and possibly without arms, were killed. Of course, we see Atahualpa try to shift the blame to his captains and advisors, who were all killed in the plaza. Pretty convenient. Did Atahualpa ever truly want peace with the conquistadors? We'll never know. Perhaps he wanted to learn more about the weapons and other technology that they brought. Or perhaps Atahualpa would have killed them outright, causing other conquistadors to think twice about exploring South America. But the events of November 14th did not stop the lies and deceit from continuing in the mountain town of Cajamarca. Not long after the ransom for Atahualpa's freedom was paid, a rumor enveloped Cajamarca that an Inca army was amassing in the mountains outside of the town, bent on freeing Atahualpa from the conquistadors. Now, though he was a prisoner, Atahualpa was allowed to conduct the affairs of the empire as if everything was business as usual. This meant he had advisors, could make decisions and send messages to officials or generals. So Atahualpa was questioned repeatedly about this rumor of an army gathering nearby, and time and again, the Inca continued to deny having any knowledge of an army gathering near the town. It's needless to say, but this phantom army struck fear into Pizarro and his men. After all, there were only a few hundred of them, and though they were able to take the Inca by surprise once, then the conquistadors all knew that they could not stand up against a large army in pitched battle. So what did Pizarro do? He sent out a team comprised of many who were against putting out Atahualpa to death to scout out and find this army, while Pizarro and his closest allies organized a sham trial, guilty army, because there never was one. It is said that one of Pizarro's indigenous interpreters made up the rumor because he sought to make one of Atahualpa's wives his own. However, this woman would soon join Atahualpa by her own hand shortly after. Or it could be that the interpreter was simply a scapegoat, another lie made up by the conquistadors to justify their execution of Atahualpa. The Inca had been on rocky ground for some time. Although they might have realized it, disease and civil war were beginning to cripple the expansive empire. Blinded by their hubris and ignorant of the capabilities of the conquistadors, the Inca invited the enemy to lay a trap for them to walk into. All Pizarro had to do was lie just enough in the game of diplomacy to put himself into a position to strike. And thus it was deceit and lies surrounding Cajamarca that ended the Inca. Or was it? At the risk of extending this talk longer than it should, I wanted to introduce one more lie or falsehood surrounding the events of Cajamarca. And we'll begin with the question of how many of you listening learned that the Inca Empire ended with Atahualpa when Atahualpa was captured by Pizarro and killed by his hand? The Inca fell, the Spanish colonized, and here we are today. Nice, clean ending, isn't it? Now, when people ask me what books they should read about the Inca, I've often suggested D'Altroi's The Incas or McEwen's The Incas' New Perspectives. Both give a very good general overview of the Inca, but they have one thing wrong. They end with the events of Cajamarca. In fact, both books only dedicate 3 to 5 pages, respectively, to the history after Atahualpa's demise. It's as if we as a society, and perhaps I'm speaking strictly from a Western perspective, have actively ignored events after, as if we are living and adding to this collective lie. I admit, although I knew there was more to the story after Cajamarca when I began my podcast, I didn't quite know how much. but I knew I wanted to explore it. And it turns out there is an invaluable amount of information and story there. Everything from Manco Inca's rebellion and the establishment of an exile state deep in the jungle, to his brother Paulu cooperating with the Spanish, to the reduction, and to the and Titu Cusi Yupanqui diplomatically outmaneuvering his Spanish counterparts. Some of the best stories come from Cieza de Leon's accounts when he traveled to Peru a few decades after the events of Cajamarca. Of course, one might say, well, we need to draw the line somewhere. We can't have the story go on and on. And perhaps they're right in a sense. I mean, there certainly wasn't an empire after Cajamarca. Thus, the lies and events of Cajamarca mark a definitive turning point and herald in the beginning of Spanish conquest and later control of South America. However, this transition from Inca to viceroyalty period is drastically overlooked and makes for fascinating reading. At least you're all now aware a bit more about it, if you weren't already, that there is much more to the story. Thank you all for joining me today. It's been my pleasure, and I'm happy, if time allows, to answer any questions.
We've got just a few minutes left, but people have questions, put them in the chat. I don't see any in the chat or the Q&A, but I can kick things off if people want to think. We heard a lot today about the repeated mendacity of the conquistadors in their conquest, or if one wants to be more favorable to them, their repeated use of ruses and deception to help win. Is there reason to believe that the conquistadors were unusually deceptive, mendacious, or were things like ruses, lies, etc., a standard part of the Inca toolkit as well when they were fighting, and they just maybe didn't use them as much, didn't appreciate the cultural gap, what was going on?
I think it's much more the latter. The Incas certainly uh, played their own games of deception during their conquests. They would constantly come over the hillside with a large army and say, hey, we're gonna conquer you, give up now, or we're gonna, completely wipe you clean. And some people would give in to that quite easily. Others would resist. There's another one where the Inca were slighted and they feinted a retreat. A couple instances of that, and they hid out in bushes and later turned the lake. They were hiding in blood red with the casualties of the other group. So it was definitely something that the Inca more or less underestimated the capabilities of the conquistadors and likely didn't see them as a viable threat based on numbers. And because that's how you won in Andean warfare typically it was a numbers game.
Uh, See, still not seeing any more questions. Feel free to drop them in, or comments or jokes or whatever you want to do in these few minutes that we have left. Uh, do you think that like, is it 100% of the success of Pizarro's crew was due to their use of these? Would they have failed had they been more straightforward? Did the lying make the difference in their success, or is it merely a contributing factor?
I think it was definitely contributing. I think again the Inca were too confident in themselves and in their numbers. They could have set an ambush quite easily, and the horses showed that picture, that illustration. Obviously, a more modern interpretation, but these aren't like highways, modern highways. These are narrow mountain roads and very tricky for horses of this period to traverse, and they could have easily toppled the conquistadors at any point. But it's almost like in this case, curiosity killed the cat in a way. Um, Atahualpa didn't want to do that. There was a belief, not it was pretty much discredited quite early that these were Viracochas, or the creator god, returning to the Andes. Viracocha is described as white and having beard, and all these men were white and had beards. And so there was some belief out there that, hey, these are the creator gods coming back to us. There's no evidence that Atahualpa believed that, or the that his advisors believe that. But
Did it appear to have been genuine, or is that the sort of thing that was written down later by the conquistadors in the mythologized retelling of their conquest? Like, because you see a similar story pop up when the Aztec conquest as well.
sure, yeah, it could have definitely been interpreted on the conquistador part or later historians' accounts as they're coming back and interviewing descendants of Atahualpa and just trying to make their own story more glamorous. So that's hard to tell if it really took hold or not. I tend to believe like the Inca were a bit smarter than that. This was definitely a different group. They didn't know from where,
It
but they
doesn't
knew
appear to have
that.
been an important misconception at any rate.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Uh, just got a few more minutes. Just keep talking until we hit time, I guess. So the Inca had no knowledge of the momentous events that had happened up in Mexico. Is that correct, or had there been
None, yeah,
information filtering down, or
none that we know of, unfortunately. Like we are missing. This story is all very one-sided, right? We don't have written records. They kept quipus, which were mnemonic devices, and we can link those back to basically accounting records, but we don't have any written records saying, and this disease came by, and then all these white men showed up, etc. Or any proof that they knew that there was another large empire in Mesoamerica, even. I guess there is this one account that on one of Pizarro's voyages down south, because he just didn't do one and land at Tumbes. He did a few explorative runs. He left a couple scouts behind, and they met Huayna Capac, Atahualpa and Huascar's father. And the story goes, and this is just from a single source, so who knows how viable it is that Atahualpa, or sorry, Huayna Capac had those two men executed. So it's possible that there was some little bit of foreshadowing that, hey, these people are coming by in this big boat from the sea. Who knows who they are? But in terms of how information from Mesoamerica was traveling down south, it's still kind of a mystery. We know obviously corn, maize is a big part of Andean diet. It started in modern day Mexico and traded all over the world. So there's some sort of trade going on, but in terms of diplomatic knowledge, doesn't seem to be any that we know of.
all right. Well, we are at time, so thank you again, Nick. Thank you to all of you for watching. Encourage you to check out the schedule and go to one of the other great intelligent speech talks in the next segment, starting in 5 minutes.
Thanks, everyone. It's been a pleasure.